He overheard me complaining about our marriage to my best friend. What he did next left me speechless. Hello, Reddit. I have a bit of a problem. I don't know how I could be so incredibly stupid to do something like this. My name is Sophie, and I'm 35 years old. I've been married to Adam for 10 years, and we have 2 beautiful kids, ages 8 and 6. Adam is a wonderful father, the kind who never misses a soccer game or bedtime story. He's hardworking, dependable, and kind. From the outside, we look like the picture-perfect family, but that's just the surface. Behind the smiles and the beautiful family photos, I've felt something missing for years. Adam is a good man, I know that. But over time, our relationship has changed. What used to feel exciting and full of possibility has become predictable, even stagnant. He's reliable, always steady, but that steadiness has begun to feel suffocating. There's no spark anymore, no passion. Everything about our marriage has settled into a routine, meals, conversations, even intimacy. It's all so predictable. I know it sounds ungrateful to say, but I can't help how I feel. I started to notice the cracks a few years ago, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself that this was just what happens after a decade of marriage. Passion fades, doesn't it? Everyone says that relationships evolve, that you trade the butterflies for something deeper and more meaningful. But I wasn't feeling anything deeper. I was just feeling, I was feeling invisible. Adam doesn't neglect me, at least not in the traditional sense. He's present, physically at least. He's there for the kids, for the bills, for the house. But emotionally, it's like he's checked out. He doesn't see me anymore, not really. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling or notice when I make an effort. Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers the woman I was before we had kids. Before life became this endless loop of responsibilities, I don't think he means to ignore me. He's just comfortable, settled in his ways, but that comfort feels like a prison when you're craving something more. About a year ago, when I was feeling particularly low, I reconnected with an old friend from college. His name was Lucas, and he messaged me out of the blue on social media. It was a simple message, something friendly and harmless, and at first I didn't think much of it. I responded politely, catching him up on my life, asking about his. We exchanged a few messages over the course of a week, nothing out of the ordinary. But then the messages started to change. They became more frequent, more personal. Lucas asked me about my life in ways Adam hadn't in years. He wanted to know how I was feeling, what my days looked like, what I missed about the past. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't opened up to anyone in a long time. He made me laugh, reminded me of who I used to be before I became someone's wife and mother. I started to look forward to his messages, to the way they made me feel seen. At first, I told myself it was innocent. We were just catching up, right? There was nothing wrong with reminiscing about old times, but deep down, I knew better. I knew what I was doing when I started checking my phone obsessively, hoping for another message from him. I knew what I was doing when I started responding late at night after Adam had gone to bed. Lucas made me feel wanted, and I hadn't felt that in years. The shift happened gradually. One day, we were joking about our college days, and the next, he was telling me how beautiful I looked in my profile picture. I laughed it off at first, but the compliment stuck with me. It felt good to hear. It felt like a lifeline. I started sharing more with him, my frustrations with Adam, my feelings of being invisible. Lucas listened in a way that made me feel understood. He told me I deserved to feel special, that I deserved excitement and passion in my life. I knew I shouldn't be listening to him, but I couldn't stop. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel alive again. It wasn't long before our conversations turned into something more. He started flirting, and I flirted back. It was subtle at first, playful teasing that felt harmless, but it quickly escalated. I started sending him pictures, at first just casual selfies, then photos that were less casual. Lucas's reactions were intoxicating. He made me feel sexy, desirable, like I was the most attractive woman in the world. It was a feeling I hadn't had in so long, and I became addicted to it. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have stopped before it went any further, but I didn't. I let myself fall deeper into it, convincing myself that it wasn't a big deal as long as Adam didn't find out. I told myself it wasn't real cheating. It was just messages, just pictures. But then Lucas suggested we meet in person, and I didn't hesitate. The first time we met, I was nervous. I told myself I wouldn't let anything happen, that it would just be coffee, just a chance to talk face to face. But when I saw him, all of my resolve disappeared. He was charming and confident, everything Adam wasn't. That first meeting turned into our first kiss, and that kiss turned into something I can't take back. Over the next few months, I met Lucas more times than I can count. Hotels, quiet bars, places where no one would recognize me. Each time I told myself it would be the last, that I would end it and focus on my marriage. But every time I tried to pull away, I felt the pull of his attention, his validation. I started to resent Adam even more, blaming him for the distance between us, for the choices I was making. I convinced myself that I deserved this, that I had every right to seek out the passion and excitement I wasn't getting at home. Looking back, I can see how selfish I was. I can see how I let my own insecurities and dissatisfaction cloud my judgment. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I wasn't thinking about what I was risking. I was only thinking about how Lucas made me feel. And that's what led to everything falling apart. When I look back now, I can see exactly when it started, the moment when the cracks in my marriage with Adam became too big to ignore. He wasn't a bad husband. He was always there when I needed him. But that was part of the problem. He was always the same, predictable to the point of frustration. Every day felt like a repeat of the one before. He'd go to work, come home, help with the kids, and then settle into his routine of reading or watching TV before bed. It was comforting at first, knowing I could always rely on him, but over time, that comfort began to feel like a prison. I started to crave something more, something exciting. Adam didn't see it. He didn't notice the way I began withdrawing, the way I spent more time on my phone or avoided sitting next to him on the couch. He didn't ask why I stopped initiating conversations about our days or why I seemed distracted during dinner. He just assumed everything was fine, that we were in a good place. I told myself it was his fault, that he should have noticed the signs, but deep down, I knew I was hiding it on purpose. I didn't want to face the truth, that I was unhappy in a way I couldn't fully explain. That's when Lucas came back into my life. It was so innocent at first, just a friend request on social media from an old college acquaintance. Lucas and I had shared a few classes back then, and while I wouldn't have called us close, I always remembered him as the guy who could make anyone laugh. He had this charm about him, this effortless confidence that drew people in. Seeing his name pop up on my phone made me smile in a way I hadn't smiled in months. Our first few messages were casual, catching up on life and reminiscing about college. I told him about Adam, the kids, and our life in the suburbs. He told me about his work, his travels, and his single, carefree lifestyle. At first, it felt harmless. It was just nice to have someone to talk to, someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I found myself looking forward to his messages, checking my phone obsessively for that little notification. It didn't take long for the tone of our conversations to change. Lucas had always been a flirt, and soon his messages were filled with compliments. How great I looked in my photos. How he couldn't believe I was old enough to have 2 kids. I laughed it off at first, telling myself it was just Lucas being Lucas. But the truth was, I liked it. I liked the attention, the feeling of being seen. Adam never said things like that to me anymore, and hearing it from Lucas was like a breath of fresh air. The shift was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. What started as lighthearted teasing turned into something deeper. He began texting me late at night, and I found myself responding, even when Adam was asleep beside me. We started talking about things I hadn't shared with anyone in years. My frustrations, my feelings of being stuck, my longing for something more. Lucas listened in a way that made me feel understood, and the more I opened up to him, the more he opened up to me. One night, after weeks of texting and late-night phone calls, Lucas suggested we meet in person. He said he'd be in town for a few days and wanted to catch up. I hesitated at first, telling myself it was a bad idea, but the pull was too strong. I told Adam I was meeting a friend for coffee and drove to the hotel where Lucas was staying. My heart was racing the entire way, a mix of excitement and guilt swirling in my chest. When I saw Lucas in the hotel lobby, it was like all the tension from our messages came to life. He greeted me with that same charming smile I remembered from college, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. We sat in the bar, talking and laughing like old friends, but there was an undercurrent of something more. When he suggested we go up to his room, I didn't say no. I didn't even hesitate. That night was a whirlwind of emotions, exhilaration, fear, guilt, and something I couldn't quite name. It was the first time in years I felt desired, like I was the center of someone's world. Lucas made me feel sexy and alive in a way I hadn't felt since before the kids were born. The sex we had was good, it was a little too good, and I couldn't count how many orgasms I had. When I left his hotel room the next morning, I told myself it was a one-time thing, a mistake I wouldn't repeat. But even as I drove home, I knew that wasn't true. Over the next year, Lucas and I met more than 5 times. Each encounter felt like stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't a wife or a mother, but just a woman. We used hotels, quiet bars, and other discreet locations, always careful to keep our meetings a secret. I became a master of lying to Adam, telling him I was running errands or meeting friends. He never questioned me, never suspected a thing. The affair became my escape, a way to feel alive again in a life that felt like it was suffocating me. I started to resent Adam even more, blaming him for my unhappiness and convincing myself that he wouldn't care even if he found out. I told myself it wasn't real cheating because it was just physical, that it didn't change the fact that I was still a good wife and mother. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Every time I met Lucas, the guilt would hit me in waves afterward. I'd tell myself it was the last time, that I would stop and focus on my marriage. But then Lucas would text me, and I'd be right back where I started. I became addicted to the thrill, the attention, the feeling of being wanted. It was like a drug I couldn't quit, no matter how much I knew it was destroying me. As the months went on, I started to see cracks in my carefully constructed double life. Adam would ask why I seemed distracted, or why I didn't want to spend time with him anymore. I'd brush off his questions, telling him I was just tired or stressed. The truth was, I couldn't look at him without feeling a mix of guilt and resentment. I blamed him for not noticing the signs, for not fighting for our marriage. I told myself that if he really cared, he would see what was happening and try to fix it. But the truth was, Adam was still the same steady, reliable man I had married. He hadn't changed. I had. I was the one who had chosen to look elsewhere, to seek validation from someone who didn't really care about me. And yet I couldn't stop. I let myself get swept up in the fantasy, ignoring the damage I was doing to my marriage and my family. Looking back now, I can see how selfish I was, how blinded I was by my own desires. I thought I could keep my 2 lives separate, that I could have the excitement of Lucas without losing the stability of Adam. But secrets like that don't stay hidden forever, and the cracks in my double life were about to shatter everything I thought I had under control. This whole thing started as an ordinary Friday evening, one of the few times I felt like I could truly relax. Adam had taken the kids to his parents' house for the weekend, giving me the rare chance to have the house to myself. I had invited my best friend Claire over for drinks and gossip, something we hadn't done in a long time. I had no idea that night would change everything. When Claire arrived, I poured us both large glasses of wine and we settled onto the couch. The house was quiet in a way it rarely was, with no kids running around and no Adam flipping through TV channels in the background. It felt indulgent to have that space to ourselves, and as the wine flowed, so did the conversation. At first, we talked about the usual things, work, kids, the stresses of everyday life, but as the night went on, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't planned. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the weight of everything I'd been holding inside, but before I knew it, I was talking about my marriage. I told Claire how stagnant things had become, how Adam's predictability and lack of passion made me feel invisible. I complained about how he never noticed me anymore, how it felt like I was living with a roommate instead of a husband. Claire listened, nodding and making sympathetic noises, but I could tell she wasn't entirely comfortable. Still, I kept going. The wine had loosened my inhibitions, and the words spilled out before I could stop them. I told her about Lucas, how we had reconnected, how he made me feel alive again, and how much I craved the attention he gave me. I could feel my cheeks flush as I described our meetings, the way he looked at me, and the thrill of sneaking around. At one point, I even laughed as I admitted how much I enjoyed the excitement of it all. I told her about the hotels, the texts, the photos I had sent him. I didn't hold back, sharing explicit details about our encounters, details I had never spoken aloud to anyone before. I told her how Lucas made me feel sexy and confident, how he reminded me of the woman I used to be before life became so routine. Claire looked shocked, but she didn't say much. I think she was too taken aback to respond. And honestly, I didn't care. In that moment, it felt good to say it all out loud, to unburden myself of the secret I had been carrying for so long. I felt powerful, even smug, as I described how I had managed to keep the affair hidden from Adam, how easy it was to sneak away without him noticing. I didn't realize how arrogant I sounded, how cruel my words must have been. What I didn't know was that Adam had come home early. He had forgotten something at the house, his phone charger, I think, and had quietly let himself in. He must have heard me as soon as he walked through the door, because he didn't make a sound. He stayed in the hallway, just out of sight, listening to every word I said. I didn't know he was there, didn't notice the shadow of his feet just visible at the edge of the hallway. If I had seen him, maybe I would have stopped. Maybe I would have found some way to salvage the situation. But I didn't, and I kept talking. I can only imagine what it must have been like for him, standing there in silence as I laughed and bragged about betraying him. I didn't just share the fact that I had an affair. I shared every humiliating detail. I told Claire how Lucas was everything Adam wasn't, how exciting and bold he was, how much better he made me feel. I even said, in a moment of drunken arrogance, that I didn't think Adam would care if he found out because he never seemed to notice me anyway. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. I was so caught up in my own feelings, my own need to vent, that I didn't stop to think about the cruelty of my words. I didn't stop to think about how much it would hurt Adam if he ever heard them. But he did. He heard every single word. At some point, Adam must have decided he couldn't listen anymore. He left as quietly as he had come, slipping out the front door without me or Claire noticing. He didn't confront me, didn't yell or demand an explanation. He just left, leaving behind only a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. It was short, just 3 words. We need to talk. I didn't find the note until later that night, after Claire had gone home. By then, I was several glasses of wine deep and feeling the haze of tipsy confidence that comes from spilling secrets. I walked into the kitchen to grab a bottle of water and saw the note sitting there, stark against the counter. The sight of it sobered me instantly. My first thought was confusion. Why would Adam leave a note like that? Had he come home and left without saying anything? And then it hit me. He must have overheard us. He must have been standing there just out of sight while I spilled every sordid detail of my affair. My stomach dropped, and my hands began to shake as the realization sank in. He knew. He knew everything. I tried calling him immediately, but he didn't answer. The phone rang and rang until it went to voicemail, and I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I hung up without leaving a message, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. I texted him, asking where he was and if we could talk, but there was no response. The silence was deafening. I stayed up all night, replaying the conversation in my head, trying to remember exactly what I had said. The more I thought about it, the worse it became. I had been so careless, so cruel, and now Adam knew everything. I could only imagine how much I had hurt him, how devastated he must have been to hear those things from the woman he thought he knew. When morning came, Adam still hadn't responded. I called again, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, pleading with him to come home so we could talk, but there was no reply. I started to panic, realizing that this wasn't something I could brush under the rug. This was real. The secret I had worked so hard to keep had come crashing down around me, and there was no way to undo it. The guilt was overwhelming. I thought about Adam standing there in the hallway, listening to me laugh and brag about my betrayal. I thought about how much he must have loved me to not confront me in that moment, to walk away instead of exploding with anger. The thought of him crying somewhere, broken by my words, was almost too much to bear. I had always thought of Adam as strong, steady, unshakable, but I had shattered him with my selfishness, my arrogance, and now I didn't know if I would ever get the chance to fix it. That was the moment I realized how far I had fallen. Everything I had taken for granted, my marriage, my family, my life, was hanging by a thread. And for the first time, I understood that there might not be a way to put the pieces back together. Update. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. At first, I didn't think much of it. Adam had taken the kids to his parents for the weekend, after all. But then, as the haze of sleep cleared, the events of the previous night came flooding back. The note, the silence, the realization that Adam had overheard everything. My stomach twisted as I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and immediately checked for messages or missed calls. There was nothing. No reply to the texts I had sent him the night before. No missed calls, no voicemails. My heart started racing as I dialed his number. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again, and then again, but there was no answer. By the third attempt, I was shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone and staring at the note he had left. "We need to talk." Those words played over and over in my head, each time heavier with meaning. Where was he? Was he okay? Was he planning to come back? My mind spiraled with questions, but none of them had answers. I finally called his sister, hoping she might know where he was. She answered on the second ring, her voice cold and clipped. She told me that Adam was staying with her and had no intention of coming home anytime soon. When I asked if I could speak to him, she refused, saying he didn't want to talk to me. I tried to explain, to tell her it wasn't what it seemed, but she cut me off. She said Adam was devastated by what he had overheard and needed time to process everything. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Devastated. That was the word she used. Not angry, not upset, devastated. The weight of that word settled over me, suffocating and relentless. I thanked her and hung up, unable to say anything else. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the wall, my mind blank with the enormity of what I had done. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, pacing the house and checking my phone every 5 minutes. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't do anything but replay the night before in my head. I kept picturing Adam standing in the hallway, listening as I laughed and bragged about Lucas, as I shared details that no husband should ever have to hear. The image of him walking away, silent and heartbroken, haunted me. By the time Claire called, I was desperate for someone to talk to. But her voice was sharp, almost angry, as soon as she started speaking. She didn't hold back, telling me I had been reckless and selfish, that I never should have shared those details knowing Adam could have come home at any moment. She said I had put her in an impossible position, dragging her into my mess without a thought for how it might affect her. I tried to apologize, to explain that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but she wasn't having it. She told me I needed to take responsibility for what I had done, for the pain I had caused, and then she hung up. I stared at my phone, the silence in the house suddenly unbearable. I felt completely alone, abandoned by the people I had thought would always be there for me. The days that followed were some of the longest and hardest of my life. Every morning, I woke up hoping to see a message from Adam, but my phone stayed silent. Every evening, I went to bed replaying the same scenes in my head. Adam overhearing my words, his face when he realized the truth, the way he must have felt as he walked away. I couldn't stop thinking about the trust I had destroyed, the man I had hurt. For the first time, I saw how unfair I had been to him, how blind I had been to everything he had done for me and our family. I had spent years focusing on his flaws, resenting him for being steady and predictable, without ever acknowledging the love and dedication behind those traits. He wasn't boring, he was reliable. He wasn't unromantic, he was consistent. He had been there for me, always, and I had taken that for granted. The guilt was overwhelming. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't escape the crushing weight of knowing I had destroyed the one person who had always stood by me. I kept thinking about the little things, how he would bring me coffee in the mornings, how he would stay up late helping with the kids when they were sick, how he never forgot to kiss me goodnight even when he was exhausted. I had taken all of it for granted, dismissing those acts of love because they didn't look the way I thought they should. I started to realize how much I had let my own insecurities and selfishness shape the way I saw Adam. I had blamed him for my unhappiness, convincing myself that he was the problem, when the truth was, I had been the one pulling away. I had chosen to focus on what I thought was missing instead of appreciating what I had. And in doing so, I had destroyed the foundation of our marriage. The silence from Adam was unbearable. Every day that passed without hearing from him felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. I didn't know if he would ever come back, if he could ever forgive me. And honestly, I didn't know if I deserved his forgiveness. I had let my own selfish desires blind me to the man I had married, the life we had built together, and now I was left with nothing but regret. I didn't hear from Claire again either. Her silence was another reminder of how far I had fallen, how much damage I had caused. I had lost not just my husband, but my best friend, my confidant, the person who had always been there for me. And it was my fault. All of it was my fault. Sitting in the empty house, surrounded by reminders of the life I had taken for granted, I finally began to see the full extent of what I had done. I had let my own insecurities and dissatisfaction lead me down a path that had destroyed everything. And now I didn't know if there was any way to fix it. I had spent so long blaming Adam for what I thought was missing in our marriage. But the truth was, I had been the one who stopped trying. I had been the one who let the distance grow, who looked elsewhere instead of turning to him. And now it was too late to take it back. For the first time in years, I saw Adam clearly, not as the man I thought he should be, but as the man he was, the man who had loved me, who had stood by me, who had given me everything he had, and I had thrown it all away. Reddit, I don't know what to do. He's gone, and I don't know if he'll ever come back. I've destroyed the man who loved me, and now I'm left with nothing but the mess I've made. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it can be fixed. Update. Hey everyone, this is probably going to be my last post here. I feel lost. For weeks after Adam left, I clung to the hope that we could find a way back to each other. I sent him messages almost daily, apologizing, begging him to come home, telling him I'd do anything to fix what I had broken. But the silence was unbearable. I couldn't stop picturing him reading my messages and ignoring them, or worse, deleting them, without a second thought. Every unanswered call, every unreturned text felt like another door slamming shut between us. When Adam finally agreed to meet me, I felt equal parts relief and dread. I spent hours rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain myself, how I would convince him to give me another chance. But when he walked into the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, one look at his face told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't here to reconcile. He was here to end things. Adam looked different, thinner, more tired. His usual calm demeanor was still there, but his eyes were guarded, distant. He didn't even attempt a polite smile. When he sat down, the silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive. I started to speak, to apologize, to say something, but he held up a hand to stop me. He said he had things he needed to say, and he wanted me to listen. He told me he couldn't move past what he had overheard that night. It wasn't just the affair itself, though that was devastating enough. It was the way I had spoken about him, the way I had reduced our entire marriage to something meaningless, something laughable, while sharing intimate details of my betrayal with Claire. He said he couldn't get my words out of his head, couldn't stop hearing me talk about Lucas, about how exciting and bold he was, about how boring and predictable I thought Adam was. He said it wasn't just the cheating that had broken him, it was the cruelty of hearing how little I respected him. Adam said he had spent weeks trying to figure out if there was a way forward, if there was any chance we could rebuild the trust and love we had once shared. But every time he thought about trying, he remembered the sound of my laughter as I described sneaking around behind his back the way I had dismissed him so casually, so carelessly. He said the trust between us was gone, and without it, there was no foundation left to rebuild on. He told me he was filing for divorce. He said he wanted to co-parent peacefully, to do what was best for the kids, but that he couldn't stay in a marriage where he felt so disrespected, so devalued. His voice was calm, steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. I could see how much this was costing him, how deeply I had hurt him. I wanted to argue, to beg him to reconsider, but I knew it was pointless. There was a finality to his words, a weight that made it clear he had made up his mind. I had destroyed something that could never be repaired, and now I had to live with the consequences. After my meeting with Adam, I felt lost, adrift in the wreckage of my life. I didn't know where to turn, who to talk to. Claire had distanced herself, and my other friends had sided with Adam. I was alone. In my desperation, I reached out to Lucas. I told him about the divorce, about how everything had fallen apart, and I hoped he would step up, that he would offer me the comfort and support I so desperately needed. But Lucas's response was like a slap in the face. He told me he had never wanted anything serious, that our fling had always been just that, a fling. He said he didn't want to get involved in the fallout of my personal life, that it was too messy, too complicated. He made it clear that whatever we had shared was over, and then he blocked me. Just like that, he was gone, leaving me to deal with the consequences of my choices alone. For the first time, I saw Lucas for who he really was. He wasn't the bold, exciting man I had convinced myself he was. He was selfish, shallow, and uninterested in anything beyond his own gratification. I had risked everything for him, my marriage, my family, my reputation, and he had walked away without a second thought. The realization was devastating. I had thrown away the love of a good man for someone who had never cared about me at all. Word of the affair spread quickly through our social circle. At first, I thought I could keep it quiet, but these things have a way of getting out. People talked, whispered behind my back, stared at me at school events and social gatherings. The looks of judgment, the fake sympathy, the outright disdain. I could feel it everywhere I went. Friends who had once supported me stopped answering my calls. Even acquaintances treated me differently, their smiles tinged with pity or disapproval. It was clear that everyone had chosen a side, and that side wasn't mine. Adam became the sympathetic figure, the betrayed husband who had done nothing but love his wife, only to be humiliated in the worst way. People rallied around him, offering their support, their kindness, and I became the villain of the story, the ungrateful wife who had destroyed her marriage for a fling. The humiliation was unbearable. I stopped going to events, stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. I withdrew from the community where I had once been respected and admired, retreating into the small, cramped apartment I had moved into after the divorce. It was a far cry from the home I had shared with Adam, from the life I had taken for granted. Sitting alone in that apartment, surrounded by the silence of my new reality, I finally began to confront the truth about myself. I had spent so long blaming Adam for my unhappiness, for the cracks in our marriage, that I hadn't seen the role I had played in its downfall. I had let my own insecurities, my need for excitement and validation, blind me to the good in my life. I had taken Adam's love and dedication for granted, dismissing it as boring and predictable when it was the foundation of everything we had built together. I thought about Adam's face during our meeting, the quiet pain in his eyes, the way his voice shook ever so slightly when he talked about how much I had hurt him. His tears haunted me more than his anger ever could. He had loved me truly and deeply, and I had destroyed that love with my selfishness, my arrogance. I had reduced our marriage to a joke, and now I was left with nothing but regret. For the first time I saw Adam clearly, not as the man I had taken for granted, but as the man he truly was. He wasn't perfect, but neither was I. He had his flaws, his shortcomings, but he had always been there for me, always loved me in his own quiet, steady way, and I had thrown it all away for a fantasy that was never real. Reddit, it's over. My marriage, my family, my life as I knew it, it's all gone, and it's my fault. I made the choices that led to this, and now I have to live with the consequences. If you're reading this, please learn from my mistakes. Don't let your own flaws and insecurities destroy the people who love you, because once it's gone, there's no getting it back.